Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and looked at the broken cooling unit on his workbench. Another day, another repair job that barely paid enough to keep his small workshop running. He had dreamed of doing important work when he first came to Zenith Station 5 years ago. But reality had other plans. Now he fixed broken equipment for traders and hoped for something better. The station hummed around him, alive with the sounds of 1,000 different species going about their business. Zenith Station sat at the edge of human space, a massive structure where aliens and humans mixed freely. Jake had grown used to the strange sights and sounds, though he still found himself amazed sometimes at the variety of life in the universe. He checked the time and realized he needed to pick up supplies before the market closed. Jake grabbed his jacket and headed out into the crowded corridors. The lower market was always busy at this hour, packed with vendors selling everything from food to spare parts to exotic items he couldn't even identify. Jake took his usual shortcut through the narrow passages between stalls. The air smelled of spices and ozone and something sweet he couldn't name. Aliens of all shapes and sizes pushed past him, intent on their own business. He had learned to keep his head down and move quickly through the crowd. That's when he saw her. A young alien girl stood frozen in the middle of the walkway, her forearms held close to her body. She had a hard shell-like exterior that gleamed green and blue in the station lights. 2 long antennae swept back from her head, twitching nervously. Jake recognized her species as Velcrin, though he had only met a few of them before. The crowd flowed around her like water around a rock, but nobody stopped to help. An elderly Velcrin stood nearby, calling out to her in their clicking language. The old one looked exhausted and worried. Jake watched as a large trader carrying boxes nearly crashed into the girl. She didn't move or react until the last second, then stumbled backward with a frightened chirp. Something was wrong. She should have seen him coming. Without thinking, Jake stepped forward and gently touched her shoulder. She jumped at the contact, her antennae whipping around toward him. "Easy," Jake said softly. "I'm just trying to help." The elderly Velcrin hurried over, speaking rapidly in a language Jake didn't understand. But the small translator device on Jake's belt caught enough to give him the basics. "Please, we mean no trouble," the old one said through the translator. "My ward she cannot see. We are trying to reach our transport." Jake looked at the young girl more closely. Her large compound eyes, which should have been tracking movement and light, stared straight ahead without focusing on anything. She was blind. "I can help you get there," Jake offered. "Where are you headed?" The elderly Velcrin, who introduced himself as Sorn, accepted gratefully. Jake guided them through the market, keeping a protective hand near the girl to warn her of obstacles. Her name was Lyra, Sorn explained, and she was 8 years old by human standards. As they walked, Sorn told Jake their story. Lyra had been born blind, a rare condition among the Velcrin. Their medical technology had tried everything, but nothing worked. The Velcrin saw the world through complex compound eyes that processed light in ways human eyes couldn't. Their entire culture was built around visual art, color, and beauty. For Lyra to be blind meant she was cut off from the most important parts of her own heritage. "We have traveled to many worlds," Sorn said, his voice heavy with old grief. "We have seen the best doctors, the most advanced hospitals. They all say the same thing. Her neural structure is too different. The devices that work for other species cannot connect with her brain. She will be blind forever." Jake felt something twist in his chest. He looked down at Lyra, who walked carefully beside him, her antennae constantly moving as she tried to sense her surroundings. She was so small, so vulnerable in this huge station full of beings who could see and she could not. They reached the transport station, and Sorn thanked Jake for his help. Jake should have said goodbye and walked away. He had work to do, bills to pay, a life that didn't include solving impossible medical problems for alien children he had just met. But he couldn't stop thinking about Lyra's blank stare and Sorn's defeated voice. "Wait," Jake said as they were about to leave. "I work with neural interface technology. It's my specialty. Would you let me look at her medical records? Maybe I could find something the others missed." Sorn's antennae drooped with skepticism. "We have heard such promises before, human. Many have tried. All have failed." "I know," Jake said. "But what do you have to lose? Let me try. If I can't help, you're no worse off than you are now." Sorn looked at Lyra, then back at Jake. After a long moment, he clicked his mandibles in what Jake had learned was a Velcrin gesture of agreement. "Very well. I will send you her medical data. But please do not give us false hope. We have had enough of that." Jake gave them his contact information and watched them board their transport. As the ship pulled away from the station, he saw Lyra pressed against the window, her blank eyes turned toward the stars she could never see. He went back to his workshop with a new purpose burning in his mind. His business partner, Lisa Grant, was still there, working on accounting spreadsheets and muttering about unpaid invoices. "You have that look," Lisa said when she saw his face. "What did you do?" Jake told her about Lyra and Sorn. Lisa listened with growing concern. "Jake, you know we can't afford to take on charity work right now. We're barely making rent as it is." "I know," Jake said. "But Lisa, she's 8 years old and she's never seen anything. Her whole culture is based around visual beauty and she can't experience any of it. If I could help her." Lisa sighed and shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. "You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you?" "Probably." "Fine, but you still need to finish the paying jobs first. We eat before we save the world, okay?" "Deal," Jake said. That night, after Lisa had gone home, Jake sat in his workshop and stared at the medical files Sorn had sent. Page after page of failed treatments, incompatible devices, and disappointed doctors. Everyone who had looked at Lyra's case had concluded the same thing. It was impossible. Jake had never been very good at accepting impossible. He pulled up a schematic of Velcrin neural structure and set it beside a diagram of human brain functions. They looked completely different on the surface. But Jake had spent years studying how different species processed information. He knew there were patterns beneath the obvious differences, deep structures that many species shared. He just had to find them. Jake worked through the night, his coffee growing cold as he lost himself. 3 weeks passed in a blur of research and experimentation. Jake barely left his workshop except to grab food and more coffee. Lisa watched him with growing concern, bringing him meals and forcing him to sleep at least a few hours each night. "You look terrible," she told him on the 15th day. "When was the last time you showered?" Jake couldn't remember. His world had shrunk to neural patterns and quantum processors and the impossible puzzle of making a blind girl see. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning at 3 o'clock. Jake had been staring at the same data for hours, his eyes burning with fatigue, when suddenly everything clicked into place. He sat up so fast he knocked over his cold coffee. It wasn't about replicating Velcrin vision. That's what everyone else had tried, and that's why they all failed. The Velcrin visual system was too alien, too different from anything humans or other species understood. But what if he didn't try to copy their natural vision? What if instead he created a bridge, a translator that could take visual information from the world and convert it into signals Lyra's brain could understand? Jake's fingers flew across his keyboard as he sketched out the concept. A device that would learn how Lyra's specific brain worked, then adapt itself to communicate with her neural patterns. It would be like teaching two people who spoke different languages how to talk to each other, except the languages were the fundamental ways their brains processed reality. The technology already existed in pieces. Humans used neural interfaces for prosthetic limbs and communication devices. Quantum processors could adapt and learn. The trick was putting them together in a way that could handle the massive differences between human and Velcrin neurology. Jake worked for another week, barely aware of anything except his project. He raided his workshop for parts, ordering components from suppliers across the station. Lisa helped when she could, though she admitted she didn't understand half of what he was doing. "Is this even going to work?" she asked as Jake soldered tiny circuits onto a neural mesh. "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but it's the best chance anyone's had so far." The device slowly took shape. It looked crude from the outside, a bulky headset with strange protrusions and exposed wiring. Jake had focused on function over form. Beauty could come later if this actually worked. The goggles contained a visual sensor array that could capture light across multiple spectrums. Underneath was a web of neural contact points that would rest against Lyra's head, connected to quantum processors that would do the real work of translation. Jake had programmed learning algorithms that would study Lyra's brain patterns and figure out how to communicate with them. The hardest part was the safety systems. Jake built in multiple fail-safes to make sure the device couldn't damage Lyra's brain if something went wrong. He tested and retested every circuit, every line of code, every connection. He wouldn't risk hurting her, even if it meant the device might not work as well. On day 23, Jake held the finished prototype in his hands. It was ugly and awkward, but it represented weeks of barely sleeping and the best work he had ever done. Now came the terrifying part. Testing it. He contacted Sorn and asked them to return to the station. Sorn's response was cautious. They had heard nothing from Jake in weeks and had assumed he had given up like all the others. But they agreed to come. Jake spent the days waiting for them in anxious preparation. He checked every connection a dozen times. He ran simulations until his computer overheated. Lisa finally made him stop and rest. "You've done everything you can," she said. "Now you just have to see if it works." When Sorn and Lyra arrived at the workshop, Jake's hands were shaking. Lyra seemed different than he remembered, smaller somehow. The weight of what he was attempting suddenly hit him. This was a child. If he got this wrong, he might damage her brain or give her false hope or make things worse somehow. Sorn's antennae twitched with skepticism as Jake showed them the device. "This is what you have created? It looks like scrap metal." "I know it's not pretty," Jake said, "but the important parts are inside. The device will try to learn how Lyra's brain works, then translate visual information into something she can understand. At least that's the theory, and if the theory is wrong, then nothing happens. The safety systems will shut everything down before any damage can occur. I promise you I won't let it hurt her." Sorn looked at Lyra, who had been quiet through the whole exchange. Her antennae were pointed directly at Jake, sensing him with whatever other perception the Velcrin had. "What do you think, little one?" Sorn asked in their language. The translator gave Jake the words a moment later. "I want to try," Lyra said. Her voice was soft but certain. "What is the worst that can happen?" "I'm already blind," Jake felt his throat tighten. He knelt down to Lyra's level. "This might not work," he told her honestly. "A lot of very smart people have tried to help you before and couldn't. I'm just one engineer in a small workshop, but I promise I did my best." Lyra's antennae touched his face gently, the Velcrin equivalent of looking at someone. "You smell like hope," she said. Different from the doctors. They smelled like pity. Jake carefully placed the goggles on Lyra's head, adjusting them to fit her alien features. The neural contact settled against her skull, and Jake activated the device. Lights flickered across the goggles as the quantum processors began their work. For a long moment, nothing happened. Jake held his breath. Sorn's antennae were rigid with tension. Lisa stood in the doorway watching. Then Lyra went completely still. Her forearms dropped to her sides. Her antennae stopped moving. Jake felt panic rise in his throat. Something was wrong. He reached for the emergency shutdown, but before he could touch it, Lyra made a sound. It started as a small chirp, then grew into something between a gasp and a trill. Her arms came up, touching her face, the goggles, the air around her. She turned her head left, then right, then spun in a complete circle. "Colors," she whispered in broken human standard language. "I see colors." Her voice grew stronger, filled with wonder and disbelief. "Everything has colors. So many colors. The walls are gray. Your shirt is blue. Sorn is green and beautiful. There is light everywhere.
How do you stand it?"
How do you see all this and not go mad from the beauty?" Tears were streaming down Sorn's face, or what Jake assumed were tears. The old Velcrin's antennae were vibrating so fast they blurred. Jake found himself crying too, his vision blurring as he watched Lyra spin and point at everything around her. She ran to the window and pressed against it, looking out at the station. "Ships," she breathed. "I can see the ships. They're silver. The stars are white. Sorn, I can see the stars." Lisa was crying now too, her hand over her mouth. Jake wiped his eyes and tried to keep his voice steady. "How does it feel? Does anything hurt?" Lyra turned to him, and even through the goggles, Jake could sense her looking at him, really looking for the first time. "Nothing hurts. Everything is wonderful. You gave me eyes, Jake Morrison. You gave me the world." Sorn approached Jake and did something unexpected. The old Velcrin placed all four arms on Jake's shoulders in what must have been a gesture of deep respect. "We can never repay this gift. Never." "You don't have to," Jake said. "Just let her enjoy it. Let her see everything she's missed." They stayed in the workshop for hours while Lyra explored her new sense. She studied every object, marveling at shadows and reflections and the way light moved. Jake explained the technical details to Sorn, showed him how to maintain the device, how to recharge it, what warning signs to watch for. "How much do we owe you?" Sorn finally asked. "Nothing," Jake said. "It's a gift. You cannot work for free. You are a business." Some things are more important than money, Jake said. Just promise me one thing. Let me document this. The technology could maybe help others someday. Is that okay? Soren agreed immediately. They left as evening fell across the station, Lyra still talking constantly about everything she could see. Jake watched them go, exhausted and happy and certain this was the best thing he had ever done. Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. You should patent this technology. It could be worth millions. Maybe later, Jake said. Right now I just want to sleep for a week. He didn't know that in 5 days everything would change. He didn't know that word of what he had done was already spreading through channels he couldn't imagine. He didn't know that the most powerful beings in the galaxy had taken notice of a small engineer in a small workshop who had done something impossible. For now, Jake Morrison just wanted to rest and be satisfied with helping one person. That was enough. It would have to be enough. 5 days after Lyra left with her new goggles, Jake was back to his normal routine. He had caught up on sleep and was working on a repair job for a cargo hauler when Lisa burst through the workshop door. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. Jake, she said, her voice tight with panic. We have a problem. A big problem. Jake looked up from the circuit board he was repairing. What kind of problem? The kind with official seals and armed escorts, Lisa said. There are representatives from the Galactic Council outside. They're asking for you by name. Jake felt his stomach drop. The Galactic Council, the governing body that oversaw relations between hundreds of alien species, the most powerful political organization in known space. They wanted to talk to him. Why would the council want to talk to me? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. The goggles. It had to be about the goggles. 3 beings entered the workshop and Jake had to fight not to take a step back. The first was an Arxian, a crystalline species that stood nearly 8 feet tall. Light reflected through its body in dizzying patterns. The second was a Delphi, an aquatic creature in a clear environmental suit filled with blue liquid. The third was a Kree, humanoid but with cybernetic enhancements covering half its body. The Arxian spoke in a voice like wind chimes. Jake's translator rendered it into human standard. Jake Morrison, you are summoned to appear before the full Galactic Council on Concordia Prime within 72 hours to address matters of urgent galactic significance. The Kree stepped forward and handed Jake a datapad. You are charged with violations of the Genetic Neural Modification Accords, specifically the unauthorized development of cross-species neural interface technology and unauthorized medical experimentation on a minor of a member species. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. I was just trying to help someone. Your intentions are not relevant, the Arxian said. You will appear before the council. Transport has been arranged. Failure to comply will result in your immediate arrest. They left as quickly as they had arrived, leaving Jake staring at the datapad in his hands. Lisa grabbed his arm. Jake, what is happening? I don't know, Jake said, but that wasn't quite true. He was starting to understand, and the realization made him sick. Within an hour, Lisa had contacted a lawyer who specialized in interspecies law. Andrew Chen arrived at the workshop looking grim. He read through the summons carefully, his frown deepening with each page. This is serious, Andrew said. The Genetic Neural Modification Accords are ancient laws. They were created after a war where neural weapons were used to control entire populations. The penalties range from technology confiscation to imprisonment or even exile from council space. But I didn't make a weapon, Jake protested. I made a medical device to help a blind child. I understand that, Andrew said. But from the council's perspective, you created technology that interfaces directly with alien neural tissue across species barriers. That technology could theoretically be modified into a control device or a weapon, and you did it without going through any approval process or oversight. Jake sank into a chair. I just wanted to help Lyra see. I didn't think about galactic law or approval processes. I just saw someone who needed help. I know, Andrew said gently, but the council doesn't care about good intentions. They care about potential threats and maintaining order. Right now you represent both. Lisa was pacing the workshop, her anxiety filling the room. What do we do? We go to Concordia Prime, Andrew said. We prepare the best defense we can, and we hope the council is feeling merciful. The next 2 days were a nightmare of preparation. Andrew drilled Jake on what to say and what not to say. Lisa helped gather all of Jake's research data and documentation. Jake barely slept, his mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. He tried to contact Sorn and Lyra but couldn't reach them. He hoped they were okay. Hoped his attempt to help hadn't caused them problems too. The Council transport ship arrived exactly on time. It was sleek and intimidating, bearing the official seals of dozens of species. Jake, Lisa, and Andrew boarded with a small group of other beings who had business with the Council. The journey to Concordia Prime took 2 days. Jake spent most of it in his cabin, reviewing his testimony and trying not to panic. On the second day, he met an older human woman in the ship's common area. She introduced herself as Betty Walsh, a trader who had dealt with the Council many times. "First time facing the Council?" she asked, noting Jake's nervous expression. "That obvious?" Betty smiled. "You have the look. Let me give you some advice. The Council respects honesty and results, but they fear chaos. They've been governing for thousands of years, and they've seen every kind of disaster you can imagine. Show them you understand the risks of what you made. Show them humility. And whatever you do, don't make them think humans are getting too clever for their own good." "What do you mean?" "Humanity's still new to galactic politics," Betty said. "We have a reputation for being reckless and innovative in equal measure. Some Council members see us as useful. Others see us as dangerous. Your case might tip the balance either way." That thought kept Jake awake the rest of the journey. He wasn't just representing himself. He was representing humanity. The pressure of it was crushing. Concordia Prime appeared through the viewport like a dream made solid. It was a planet-sized station constructed by dozens of species over thousands of years. Organic curves blended with geometric precision. Towers reached toward space while gardens floated in artificial gravity. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful or so alien. They were escorted to guest quarters in a section reserved for beings awaiting Council hearings. The room was nice but felt like a prison. Jake stood at the window looking out at the impossible city beyond, and wondered if he would leave Concordia Prime as a free person. Lisa tried to comfort him. "You did the right thing. The Council has to see that." "Maybe," Jake said, "but doing the right thing doesn't always protect you from the consequences." Andrew spent the evening reviewing their defense strategy one more time. They would argue that Jake's goggles were a medical device, not a weapon. They would emphasize his good intentions and the positive outcome. They would request leniency based on his lack of knowledge about Council law. "It's not a strong defense," Andrew admitted, "but it's the best we have. A lot will depend on which counselors are present and what mood they're in." Jake barely touched the meal that was brought to his room. He tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept replaying his conversation with Lyra in the marketplace, the moment he had decided to help her. If he had known it would lead to this, would he have made the same choice? He liked to think he would have. But he wasn't sure. The night stretched endlessly. Jake watched the alien city through his window as lights flickered on and off in patterns he couldn't understand. Somewhere out there, the Council was preparing for his hearing. Somewhere out there, they were deciding his fate. Morning came too quickly. Andrew arrived at Jake's quarters wearing formal clothing and carrying a datapad full of notes. "It's time," he said. They walked through corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake felt small and insignificant among them. The Council chamber was enormous, an amphitheater where representatives from 87 species sat in complex arrangements. At the center was a platform where Jake would have to stand alone and face them all. Lisa squeezed his hand. "Be brave," she whispered. Jake stepped onto the platform. The Council members looked down at him from their seats, some curious, some hostile, some completely unreadable. A crystalline Arxian that seemed to be in charge struck a device that rang like a bell. "This hearing is now in session," the Arxian announced. Its voice filled the chamber. "Jake Morrison of Earth, you stand accused of violating the genetic neural modification accords. How do you plead?" Jake's mouth was dry. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Every eye in the chamber was on him. The moment felt huge, like standing at the edge of a cliff. He thought of Lyra's face when she saw colors for the first time. He thought of Sorn's tears of joy. He thought of all the children across the galaxy who might never get help because people were too afraid to try. "I did what I'm accused of," Jake said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I don't think I did anything wrong." The chamber erupted in noise. Some counselors seemed outraged. Others seemed intrigued. The Arxian struck the bell again for silence. "You will have your chance to speak," it said. "But first, the Council will present its case against you." Jake stood alone on the platform and watched as his life was torn apart piece by piece, and he wondered if he would ever see his workshop again. The prosecutor was a Cree named Vex, and he was merciless. His cybernetic eye glowed as he displayed holographic images of Jake's goggles for the entire council to see. The device rotated slowly in the air, its internal workings exposed for analysis. "Members of the council," Vex began, his voice cold and precise, "what you see before you is perhaps the most dangerous piece of technology created in the past century. Jake Morrison would have you believe this is a simple medical device, but the truth is far more sinister." Jake wanted to object, but Andrew placed a hand on his arm, warning him to stay quiet. Vex continued, "This device interfaces directly with neural tissue across species barriers. It learns individual brain patterns and adapts to communicate with them. Do you understand what this means? It means this technology could be modified to control thoughts, manipulate emotions, or destroy minds entirely." The hologram shifted, showing simulations of the goggles being used as weapons. Jake watched in horror as the images displayed his creation, forcing beings to harm themselves, stealing memories, causing mass psychological damage. None of it was real, but it looked convincing. "Morrison created this technology in secret," Vex said. "He conducted unauthorized experiments on a minor without proper oversight or safety protocols. He violated every principle of the genetic neural modification accords, and he did it all in a small workshop with no supervision, no peer review, no consideration for the consequences." Several council members were nodding. Jake felt his hope draining away. "The accords exist for a reason," Vex concluded. 3,000 years ago, neural weapons were used to enslave billions. Entire civilizations were destroyed. We created these laws to ensure such horrors never happen again. Jake Morrison has broken those laws. He has created a weapon regardless of his claimed intentions. The council must punish this violation severely to ensure no one else follows his example. Vex sat down, and the chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. Jake's legs felt weak. The prosecutor had made him sound like a monster. Andrew stood and began Jake's defense. He argued that the goggles were medical devices, not weapons. He explained Lyra's condition and the failure of all previous treatments. He showed evidence of Jake's safety protocols and his careful testing. But Jake could see it wasn't working. The council members looked skeptical or bored. Some seemed to have already made up their minds. The Arxian in charge, whose name was Genkar, watched with an unreadable expression. After Andrew finished, Genkar spoke. "The council acknowledges that Morrison's intentions may have been good. However, good intentions do not excuse violations of galactic law. The potential for harm from this technology is immense." A counselor from a species Jake didn't recognize spoke up. "We should destroy the device and all research related to it. Morrison should be imprisoned as an example to others who might consider similar violations." Others voiced agreement. Jake felt panic rising in his throat. This couldn't be happening. He had only tried to help. Genkar raised a crystalline appendage for silence. "Before we deliberate, Morrison has the right to speak on his own behalf. Jake Morrison, do you wish to address the council?" Jake looked at Andrew, who nodded. This was his last chance. Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I'm not a politician or a lawyer," Jake began. His voice echoed in the huge chamber. "I'm just an engineer, and I'm not very good at speeches. But I want to tell you about Lyra." He described meeting her in the marketplace, seeing her struggle through a world she couldn't perceive. He talked about her isolation, how she couldn't experience her own culture's art and beauty. He explained how every medical expert had failed her because they tried to replicate something that couldn't be replicated. "I didn't set out to break your laws," Jake said. "I didn't even know about the accords until 5 days ago. I just saw a child who needed help and I had the skills to try. Maybe that makes me reckless, maybe it makes me dangerous, but I can't regret giving Lyra the ability to see." He paused, looking around at the assembled counselors. "You're right that my technology could be dangerous. But so could any technology in this room. The question isn't whether something can be misused. Everything can be misused. The question is whether the good it can do is worth the risk." Jake's voice grew stronger. "Lyra can see now. For the first time in her life, she can see colors and faces and the stars. She can participate in her own culture. She can live a normal life. If you want to punish me for that, fine. But don't pretend the problem is my technology. The problem is that your systems failed her first." The chamber erupted. Some counselors seemed angry at Jake's directness. Others appeared thoughtful. Jenkar struck the bell for order. "Your words are noted," Jenkar said. "The council will now deliberate." Jake was escorted back to a waiting area with Lisa and Andrew. They sat in tense silence while hours passed. Andrew tried to look optimistic, but Jake could see the worry in his eyes. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Lisa finally said. "Probably both," Jake admitted. After 6 hours, they were summoned back to the chamber. Jake's legs felt like water as he returned to the platform. The council members had returned to their seats, their expressions still unreadable. But before Jenkar could speak, there was a commotion at the chamber entrance. Guards were trying to stop someone from entering, but a familiar voice rang out in protest. "We have the right to speak. You cannot deny us." It was Sorn. And beside him, wearing her goggles, was Lyra. The chamber descended into chaos. Jenkar struck the bell repeatedly, calling for order. Sorn and Lyra walked onto the chamber floor, ignoring protocol completely. Several counselors looked outraged at the interruption. Others seemed curious. "This is highly irregular," Jenkar said. "You were not summoned to this hearing." "Then we summon ourselves," Sorn said firmly. "This human stands accused of harming my ward. We are here to speak the truth." Jenkar considered for a long moment, then gestured for them to proceed. "Very well. But be brief." Lyra stepped forward, and the entire chamber fell silent. She was so small on the huge floor, but she stood with her head high. She spoke in clear human standard, her voice carrying through the space. "My name is Lyra. I was born blind. For 8 years I lived in darkness while everyone around me saw beauty I could not imagine. Doctors told me I would be blind forever. They said I was too different, that nothing could help me." She touched her goggles gently. "Then Jake Morrison helped me. He didn't see a different species or a problem to report to a council. He saw a person who needed help. And he gave me the galaxy." Lyra turned slowly, looking up at all the counselors. "Before these goggles I was broken. Everyone said so. But Jake Morrison didn't treat me like I was broken. He treated me like I deserved to see, just like everyone else." Her voice grew passionate. "You say his technology is dangerous. You say he broke your laws. But your laws left me in darkness. Your systems abandoned me. Jake Morrison did what you could not or would not do. He gave me hope. He gave me life." She paused, and in the silence her next words rang clear. "Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Help people who need it?" No one spoke. Jake watched tears stream down Lisa's face. Andrew was gripping his datapad so hard his knuckles were white. Sorn stood beside Lyra with all 4 arms on her shoulders, proud and protective. Jenkar's crystalline body seemed to shimmer with some emotion Jake couldn't identify. The ancient Arxian looked at Lyra for a long moment, then at Jake, then at the assembled council. "The council will deliberate further," Jenkar said quietly. "This changes things." As Lyra and Sorn were escorted from the chamber, Lyra turned and looked directly at Jake. Even through the goggles, he could feel her gratitude. She raised one hand in a small wave. Jake waved back, his throat too tight to speak. Whatever happened next, at least she had been heard. At least the council had to see what their laws and systems had failed to do. At least they had to confront the reality of one small girl who just wanted to see the stars. The council deliberated for another 3 hours. Jake waited, exhausted and emotionally drained, hoping that Lyra's words had made a difference. Finally, they were summoned back one last time. Jenkar stood at the center of the chamber, and Jake couldn't read anything from the Arxian's crystalline features. This was it. The moment that would determine his future and maybe humanity's place in the galaxy. Jake took a deep breath and waited for judgment.